Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is now up for debate and an eventual vote in the Senate after passing the House last week. But this bill and what's at the heart of it, a definition of anti-Semitism, has faced widespread pushback. It would require the Federal Education Department to use the definition outlined by the Stockholm-based International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance when addressing allegations of discrimination in higher education. But amid mounting backlash, more than 1,000 Jewish professors signed onto a letter this week calling on lawmakers not to support the legislation and, quote, reject any effort to codify into federal law a definition of anti-Semitism that conflates anti-Semitism with criticism of the state of Israel. Some are concerned that under the law, schools could be accused of discrimination and risk losing federal funding for merely offering courses that are critical of Zionism or allowing protests against Israeli government policies. One of those critics is the lead drafter of the text that became the IHRA definition, Kenneth Stern, who has argued that it was never meant to chill free speech on campuses. Stern writes in the Boston Globe, quote, "When we use the term anti-Semitism so expansively, it's emptied of its meaning, harming our ability to confront it." With me now to discuss this is Kenneth Stern, director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate and author of The Conflict Over the Conflict, the Israel-Palestine Campus Debate. Kenneth, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for making time for us. For years, you've raised concerns about enshrining the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism into law. Elaborate for us and our viewers on your concerns about a more expansive definition of anti-Semitism and why you are concerned about how it could target free speech on college campuses.
Well, thank you first for having me. And it has been used for targeting free speech on college campuses. It was developed in 2004 and 2005, the text of it, mostly to help European data collectors take the temperature of anti-Semitism across borders and across time. But it was never intended as a hate speech code. And what we started seeing in 2010, when the Department of Education made clear that Jews and Sikhs and Muslims as ethnicities were protected under Title VI from a pervasively hostile campus environment, we started seeing lawsuits to say that certain things that people believed violated the definition, examples about Israel, things related to courses that were being taught, speakers that were coming to campus, and so forth, should be the basis of a Title VI case. So it was used as a hate speech code. And one of the things that really troubled me is when I started working at the American Jewish Committee on these issues in the 90s, one of the first things that we discovered, talking to college presidents and deans and provosts and faculty, is the last thing you want to do about bigotry on campus is have this simple rule that says what speech is okay and what isn't. You want to make clear that students shouldn't be harassed, they shouldn't be intimidated, they shouldn't be bullied, but they should expect to hear things that they don't like, and that should be responded to with teaching and other speech.
How do you personally feel about how the definition is being used beyond its original intent? And more broadly speaking, the way that anti-Semitism is being conflated with anti-Zionism, do you think that is a major cause of concern to stifle debate around Israel?
Well, my major concern is that we're at a point where we try to get simple solutions to complicated issues. We see it on this issue, we see it on issues around the 2024 election, we see it on immigration, we see it on abortion. So I run a hate studies center, and people who hate want to see simple things, want to have clarity, want to believe that justice is on their side and injustice is on their other side. And there's brain science and there's social psychology that helps support this conclusion. But people that are fighting hate and anti-Semitism are human beings too. And we tend to want to have simple solutions. And that's what worries me most, that it sort of blinds us to the things that we can be doing about anti-Semitism on and off the campus when we think there's a handy-dandy little sort of cheat sheet that says this is okay to say and this isn't okay. When you look at how anti-Semitism actually works, think of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh. It was motivated with a background of people talking about invaders coming over the southern border, and Bowers thought, because the Jewish community there had hosted a pro-immigration group, that was a target. Nobody would say that the shooting at the El Paso Walmart a few months later by somebody with the same ideology was an act of anti-Semitism. So we limit how we think about how anti-Semitism actually affects the real world when we just say, is it on this side of the line or that side of the line? And we don't want to use it as a matter of law to stifle speech that ends the debate and stops us from doing the things that we should be doing on the campus.
I have to say, I hadn't thought about the Tree of Life or the Walmart shooting as acts of anti-Semitism the way that you just outlined, but it's true that when you think of what the shooter's motivation was because of the immigration policies, that it does connect to anti-Semitism. I'm really glad that you did use that as an example. Let me ask you about another angle to this, if you will. Slate's Emily Tamkin writes that groups like the Anti-Defamation League have abandoned some of the people it exists to protect by reportedly mapping ceasefire protests by Jewish groups as anti-Semitic incidents and updating its methodology to include certain anti-Israel incidents in its calculation of how much anti-Semitism has actually risen based on speech, as you mentioned right now. What is your response to these kinds of designations by prominent groups like the ADL, who want to use this very expansive terminology of anti-Semitism to include those specific phrases, things like from the river to the sea or calling for uprisings?
Well, there's a debate inside the Jewish community, and the debate is whether a certain view towards Israel is required to be inside the tent. And I get it when Jonathan Greenblatt and others believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism all the time, but the problem is that it isn't. If you're a Palestinian or a supporter of Palestinian rights and you see Zionism as affecting your ability to control your lives, that isn't because it's about Jews. And inside the Jewish community, you have a generation of younger people that are still very much a minority, but their Judaism leads them to an anti-Zionist position. They can't square, and this is JVP, and if not now that you just mentioned, they can't square the idea of a Jewish state with the idea of how do you treat the stranger and how do you repair the world. I will disagree with them on the merits of that, but I will not label their views as anti-Semitic. I just say I disagree with them.
Kenneth Stern, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate you sharing your expertise and insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.